Okay, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are going to embark on a seriously fascinating journey to become educational truth detectives. I mean, think about it. Have you ever been scrolling through social media and suddenly you see this wild, too good to be true claim about the ultimate secret to learning a language? We literally hear them all the time. But how do we actually, confidently separate the scientifically verified facts from someone's mere personal opinion? Well, that's exactly what we're tackling today. We're going to build the ultimate toolkit to do just that.
Let's kick off our investigation with a massively popular claim you've almost definitely bumped into online. Picture this. You see an ad, and it confidently declares, "You can learn English while you're fast asleep." Now, as a smart educator or language learner, what are you supposed to do with that? Do you hit add to cart and buy those audio tracks? Or is that just a total myth waiting to be busted? To figure out if a claim like this actually holds any water, we've got to look past the flashy marketing and ask the hard questions about how this supposed knowledge was actually acquired.
All right, moving into Section 1, Epistemology, dissecting fact from opinion.
To really dissect fact from fiction and answer questions about, say, learning in your sleep, we need a highly specialized toolkit. And that brings us to our first major concept, which is epistemology. Now, it comes from the Greek words episteme, which means knowledge, and logos, which means study. Basically, it's the philosophy of how we acquire, test, and justify what we call true knowledge. If ontology is the branch asking what it is we're studying, epistemology totally shifts our focus to how we know it's actually true. It is absolutely the heartbeat of the scientific method. It's that critical filter that stops us from just blindly accepting unverified beliefs and forces us to demand rigorous proof.
Let's look at a super practical example. Say a fellow teacher tells you that using pop songs teaches vocabulary way better than traditional rote memorization. I mean, that sounds great, right? But epistemologically speaking, that claim is really just a personal impression. It only upgrades from an opinion to a scientifically justified fact when it's rigorously tested. You'd need to set up a real experiment, comparing a control group with an experimental group. The testing is the magic ingredient here.
Let's jump to Section 2, 3 pathways to knowledge.
So, knowing we need to test things is awesome, but how exactly do we gather that knowledge in the first place? Well, let's compare our first two investigative tools. First up, we have the deductive method. This relies on logical syllogisms. You move from a big, broad, general rule straight down to a specific conclusion. If your initial rules are rock-solid true, your specific conclusion has to be true. On the flip side, we have the inductive method. This was famously popularized by Francis Bacon as the bedrock of modern science, and it moves in the exact opposite direction. You start by observing a bunch of specific individual cases, and from those empirical observations, you build up a brand new general rule.
In a real, everyday classroom, this looks quite different depending on your approach. Teaching grammar rules step by step, that is highly deductive. You give the general rule right up front, hey, all regular verbs in the past tense get an ed, and the student applies it specifically to the word walk to get walked. Easy, right? But now, picture an exhausted teacher grading 50 essays on a Sunday night. They start noticing a pattern, student after student, making mistakes with a and an. The teacher connects the dots and builds a general conclusion. Wow, my class really struggles with articles. That right there is inductive reasoning in action.
Now, modern science, it wanted the absolute best of both worlds, so it smashed them together into the hypothetico-deductive method. This is pretty much the gold standard for scientific research, and it follows 3 really clear steps. First, based on your initial observations, you formulate a hypothesis, basically a really educated guess. Second, you deduce the logical predictions from that guess. And third, you empirically test those predictions in the real world through observation or a controlled experiment. So, the absolutely crucial point is how you actually apply this to research. Let's say you hypothesize that a cool new gamification app increases student motivation for learning vocabulary. Using this hypothetico-deductive method, you have to deduce a logical consequence. You'd say, okay, if this is true, the app users will score higher on a motivation survey than the non-users. And then, you actually run the experiment with a control group to empirically test that specific prediction. You don't just guess and call it a day. You observe, you deduce, and you test.
Okay, on to Section 3, testing the truth of a claim.
Now that we've got the methods down for gathering evidence, we have to cross a really critical bridge. We have to ask, how do we evaluate if the knowledge we just produced is actually true? Well, in philosophy and science, we use 3 major theories of truth as our framework. First up is coherence. This is where truth is based on logical consistency within a system. Think about the rules of adding s or es in English grammar. It's true because it fits perfectly inside that agreed-upon system. Second is correspondence. This demands that a claim matches objective, verifiable data in the real world. Like, if you claim the average class TOEFL score is 450, it's only true if it corresponds perfectly to the actual physical test records. And third is the pragmatic theory, which focuses entirely on practical usefulness.
It's actually really fascinating to look a bit closer at that pragmatic theory of truth, which was heavily championed by the philosopher William James. In the pragmatic view, something is true simply if it works in real life. Think about communicative language teaching, or CLT. So many educators consider CLT the right or true approach, not necessarily because it aligned perfectly with some rigid, abstract linguistic theory, but simply because it has proven incredibly successful at helping students actually talk and communicate in the real world. Its practical success is literally its truth.
And that leads us to Section 4, Research, Quantitative versus Qualitative.
This completely shifts your perspective when you step into the role of a future researcher. Maybe you're even gearing up to design your own thesis. The approach you take completely dictates your epistemological toolkit. If you choose quantitative research, you are relying heavily on that hypothetico-deductive method and the correspondence theory of truth. You want those hard, measurable statistical numbers that correspond to objective reality. But if you pivot and choose qualitative research, you're leaning way more into the inductive method and often the coherence theory of truth. You are gathering deep, specific, real-world observations to build up a really rich understanding of contextual meaning and narrative.
So, the big takeaway here is that both paths are equally valid. They're just used for entirely different questions. You could totally do a quantitative study on the effect of podcasts on listening skills, using hard pre-test and post-test scores. Or you could flip it and do a qualitative study on the student experience with English on social media, using deep, inductive interviews to uncover the meaning behind their experiences. Both are super rigorous. Both heavily use epistemology. They just pull different tools out of the kit.
Finally, Section 5. Becoming a critical researcher.
As we pull all these methods and theories together, the ultimate goal for you, as a learner and as a professional, is to become a highly critical, independent evaluator of information. Remember, epistemology is not just some dry, dusty philosophy reserved for ancient Greeks in togas, okay? It is your everyday practical detective kit. It empowers you to navigate the incredibly complex, sometimes confusing world of English education. It allows you to rigorously evaluate new teaching fads, responsibly design your own valid research, and honestly maintain the highest standards of academic integrity. It gives you the power to pause and ask, wait, how do we actually know this?
So I'm going to leave you with a final thought to investigate on your own time. Think back to that crazy myth about learning a language in your sleep, or frankly, any other viral language claim you've seen scrolling on social media this week. If you were the researcher, how would you put that claim to the test using your brand new epistemological tools? Which specific method would you use, and which theory of truth would prove it right or wrong? Keep questioning everything, keep investigating, and thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.